same. Just before coming to this, I shared with Suzy a video that came from Russia. And it's almost like there was no time, you know, as if all these stereotypes that come from medieval times are here. The Jews are those who ruled the Russia. The only problem that Russia has that Jews till today ruled Russia. And whom they show? They show Putin, they show Medvedev, they show Yeltsin, they show Gorbachev. In their minds, they're also Jews. So how, there's no reason, I mean, how can you say anything about it? It seems to be almost like no end to it. So what can I say? This anti-Semitism that exists now, and there are different reasons for that. But since Russia is something that I know better because I spent actually half of my life now there to count, it's all the same. It's all, the roots are there and they would not go away. I even thought if I'm finishing my novel about the Jewish immigration, and that the last scene epigraph I'll share with you is that the year is 2095, and the last Jew leaves Russia, and there is a big holiday for all the nationalists, and they come and so on, and Putin is brought in already on life support. He says, I cannot die because this country without me will perish. But what you guys did, how did you guys allow the last Jew leave Russia? And the nationalists say, what's wrong with it? You idiots, who we're going to blame for revolution, for perestroika, for World War II, for everything, for what is this? Are you out of your mind? Okay, if you want to help Russia, you, Ivanov, you have papers from KGB prepared that you'll be Jewish from now on. He said, why me, and so on. That's the story of it. It's eternal. It's going on and on and on.
Well done. Let's take some more questions right there. And let me get an indication, then we'll go there next. Yes, right there.
Thank you. Well, there's been anti-Semitism in Russia and the surrounding countries for centuries. So my question is, what's the motivation for the Soviet state or the Russian state to push anti-Semitism? Is it, do they believe Jews are actually enemies of the state and they need to be suppressed for that reason? Or is it just playing up to the bigotry of the people? And my second question is, did you have a problem getting out of the country?
The second question is volume 2 that I'm writing. It's not that easy to answer. It is a saga, so to speak. But you ask very, very good question because the attitude toward all this kind of mythology that exists in the West, that the Soviet Union was the country in which there was no anti-Semitism, there was law against anti-Semites, at least before the World War II. Some people were arrested for calling somebody kikes and so on and so forth. But this a little bit gets more complicated because few people remember that Russian Revolution, 1917, won under umbrella of World Revolution. Therefore, internationalism was the banner of the time. Lenin, in his speech in 1919, said, Russian Revolution never will have a chance to survive. It will be not world revolution. So therefore, till mid-1920s, shortly after after Lenin's death, the internationalism, of course, there were attempts, of course, of that kind. We know there were attempts in Germany of riots among the blue-collar workers in Great Britain, in Hungary, and so on. Nothing really succeeded. No revolution was coming. That's clear. So when Stalin came to power, he realized that no longer in that internationalism on which the Soviet Union was built. First of all, there was a need for internationalism because, remember, Soviet constitution wanted, on one hand, to say all nations have right for self-definition. They have to live their own. At the same time, they would prefer to have it as one country. In other words, to remain within the borders of Russian Empire. Okay, so all these republics. So therefore, that was the situation that was necessary to keep the internationalism as a slogan till at least end of 20s, beginning of the 30s. But what happened next that Stalin realized no longer it works and couldn't work. Therefore, he switched the gears and he introduced the slogan to build socialism in one separate country. Yeah. And the country was, of course, the Russian Empire. Obviously, the core of the Russian Empire were Russians. Russian culture was The language was the language of the land, and therefore there was a shift toward Russian nationalism as something that would unite at least majority of the people. That at that time you will see a slew of movies about Russian historical figures, about Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, then about Russian generals like Suvorov and Kutuzov and admirals and so on. In other words, the build up of Soviet Union basically as a Russian empire without words spoken as such. That's what happened. So now there is one key event that happened in March of 1939. Stalin ordered Molotov to remove all Jews from diplomatic positions outside of the country. And now, from what we know from history, why do you think he did it? Because what is coming in August of the same year? Exactly. So he wanted to give a sign to Hitler that he is with him on that sort. He removed all. Litvinov was the Minister of Foreign Affairs at that time. He was removed. He was the representative of the Soviet Union in League of Nations and so on. He was removed. So that the wave of anti-Semitism that we saw after the war started at that time, slowly. The war obviously interrupted, and I describe also in my book how during the war there was a kind of a difficult situation for the propaganda, Soviet propaganda machine. They all of a sudden found that they have to support the image of of Jews as fighters, because otherwise they would play in the hands of the propaganda. I told you that slogan that Jews are not fighting and therefore undermine the spirit of the army. So in some movies that when I was writing my memoir, I saw back all movies of my childhood again, one more time and so on. But that's what I discovered, that actually there were Jewish characters, like from film Жди меня, Wait for Me, in which the Jewish journalist who is working, he's wounded. In other words, some war effort shown in various situations. That was the situation, that he could not give full kind of a go the way of anti-Semitism full power while war was on. But soon the war was over. Shortly after, the campaign started with as we know now, with stage murder of Michaels, the head of the Jewish theater, the director of Jewish theater, and then started the Cosmopolitan and so on and so forth. And the pinnacle was the doctor's case. So that's what happened. The shift of the politics inside of the country brought about this.
And we should probably just add to that it didn't happen without a fight. Stalin ended up killing the entire Central Committee of Lenin, and many of whom were Jews. And of course, Trotsky led the fight against him because in adopting this socialism in a single country, he was abandoning Marxism. And that's what he did. He killed Marxism, but parroted the slogans and oppressed people in the name of it. And there was a joke. Comrade Radek, who was in the Comintern, was asked by a German communist. He said, "Comrade Radek, is it true that you can build socialism in a single country?" And Radek said, "Well, yes, but God help the country." and that's the way it was. I think we have time for maybe one or two more. So you, and then, is this the last one, Louise? We can take another one. Let me get an indication now. Okay, back there. All right, go for it.
Yiddish is a language that's very rich in its vocabulary and its ability to do blessings and curses and jokes. So I'm interested whether you knew Yiddish or whether you heard it, and whether, if you did it inform or add to your writing?
It's a good question, because there's one chapter in my book is called How We Laugh in Odessa. And actually it's a sort of exactly answer to this question. What is Odessa language for? Is known for being Odessa sense of humor. Most of it comes from funny way of talking in Russian. What is the funny? Why? For this very simple reason. It's the attempt of Jewish immigrants from the shtetl, from all over the Pale of Settlement, coming to Odessa to speak quickly Russian. They construct the Russian sentence on the pattern of Yiddish. For example, Russian would say, "Слушай сюда," and the other side from Odessa would say, "Слушай сюда." Somebody from Moscow will laugh. There's no such a thing. You cannot say, but it's "Here in Mizich." You understand? So it's the same as the immigrants from all over. Like today, those who live in Brighton Beach, they say, "Ну, мне надоело драйвать." Again, they say the root of the English word and they put the Russian suffix and so on. The same pattern. So that kind of a Yiddish, not only that, the culture of Yiddish is there. I explained, for example, one sign. There's one curse in Odessa that shows Yiddish origins of it, although it says in Russian. For example, a hooligan will say, I'll beat you up the way that your neither papa nor mama will recognize you. Why? Because in Yiddish, in Jewish family, to say one word for parents like родители, it shows disrespect. You understand? So immediately you will see, this is not another side, you will say papa, mama. Я тебе папу, маму напомню, things like that. So in many other ways, I don't want to repeat what is there, but basically that's what it is. So the Yiddish was superimposed, the great writers in Russian that came from Odessa, like Babel, they used, many people in Russia tell it as jokes, these lines that people say every day in Odessa, and they don't ask for any honorarium. It comes natural.
Wonderful. Okay, back there, go ahead.
You talked about your teenage life as being in the early 50s, I assume. And during that time, of course, the State of Israel was formed. All around the world, Jewish communities outside of the Middle East, all around the world, debated it, and it was very much a topic of the day. Probably the overwhelming majority supported the formation of the State of Israel, but there were probably religious people that were against it. And then later on, another generation later, Zionism started to be started to be controversial in itself, and there were left-wingers who became anti-Zionist. In your community in Odessa or in the Soviet Union, what was the discussion about Israel? Were there Zionists and anti-Zionists, or was anti-Zionism just conflated with anti-Semitism? How did that all work?
But you ask a wonderful question, because he has a great chapter talking about what happened in your house that day.
Just to answer your question, one day my father, Odessa, because of the support, so many fruits and vegetables coming first to Odessa before sending to Moscow. And of course, first of all, Moscow has to be fed, as you understand, because this capital, foreign tourists come there and they'll see what abundance we have. That you don't have this abundance in Odessa, it's your problem, but at least people in Moscow know that this is socialist country, has everything. But of course, this is Odessa. So Odessans do some things to have some fruits and vegetables on their soul. For example, when they unload some box with oranges, all of a sudden it drops. Boom. You can't transport them, you have to sell it here. And that's how it happens. So one day, my mother brought some oranges. My father looks at the orange, and I describe it as strange. He says, "Where did you get it?" I said, "What do you mean?" "In the stores." What's? Do you know what does it mean? And there were letters that I couldn't recognize. There were letters in Hebrew. My father went to Heather in his childhood, and he could read something. And he said, "Do you know what this is? What do you know what it says?" "What it says?" "Haifa." You understand? I said, "What is Haifa? Where is Haifa?" I look at the map. There's no Haifa on the map. You're kidding me. The Soviet Union buys oranges from Israel. Oh my God. What a country. What a country. Do you understand, for that time, the very existence, he was so happy. I never saw him happy that much before or after, really. Just to answer you, what kind of a reaction? We didn't talk in this kind of a Zionism. It was a major, major coup d'etat. In other words, it's immediately produced the most positive effect on the morale of Jews in Odessa you can think of. In Moscow, as you know, when Prime Minister, and then she was a special, at that time she was Golda Meir.
Yeah.
She came to Moscow. There was a riot on the streets because all Jews of Moscow ran to see her, look at her, and applauded her. The mountain militia came just to keep the Jews somehow, keep the ambassador safe and so on. That was the reaction. Needless to say, then in 1957, when there was Festival of Youth, the first one, I went to Moscow. athletes from Israel, basketball. I mean, they were like movie stars. You wouldn't find so many in Hollywood. That people around as many that were around this basketball team from Israel at that time. That was the reaction. We didn't go into details, and it would be very strange for us to hear that some Jews are against Israel for whatever reason. You know, religious, not religious. It was beyond that. We were beyond that. It was for us very clear, black and white. We didn't have that kind of a luxury of, you understand, to dissect where you belong in that dispute. There was no conversation on that matter. Yeah.
And there's so much more. And Emil is going to be outside signing copies of the book. I really recommend it. I think you're going to find so much joy and so much to recognize in it. You'll probably laugh a lot too. Thank you for coming. I also want to just say that, you know, this series at the public library, the ALOUD series, maybe many of you come to it all the time, but you can register for free. There's not a penny that you have to pay, but it would be really nice to give a donation on your way out, just to say thanks to the LA Public Library for doing this series. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.